Very big thanks to Inge for her presentation. As Inge says, there were a number of comments in the Google Docs seeking clarification of this concept of the AKIS coordination body. But at the same time also, there were a number of people participating in the Google Docs who were already explaining the types of procedures, the types of arrangements that were being put in place. So there are actually some rather interesting insights in the Google Docs to the different approaches that different member states are taking to the AKIS coordination. So please do take the opportunity to go and take a look. Something else that Inge highlighted, which also comes out in the Google Docs, Inge's encouraging you very, very much to be to not be carrying forward existing combinations of measures, not to be carrying forward existing pathways or patterns, but to be inventive, to be flexible, and to really engage with this question of of shaping the future. And that also starts to come out in the Google Docs as well. Member states who are clearly seeing this opportunity to really begin to to reshape the relationship between research, practice, and the kind of knowledge flows within the AKIS. That was some general comments, but we have some very specific questions in the chat from our Greek colleagues regarding certification and the continued use or whatever of certification. Inge, I guess that you've seen the comments in the chat, and I guess that you would be ready to respond. Whilst Inge is responding, please, if you have any other questions, you can put them in the chat or put your hand up. Inge, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mark, and also thank you to Athanasios and Alex for these questions, because they are key questions, and it's very important for everybody to understand these rules for certification. So, at European level, in the new CAP, the FAS has been deleted. The FAS was an obligation, not under rural development, but under the horizontal regulation, to make sure that each of the countries had an advisory system, a system standing on its own, not linked with the rest of the AKIS, and which was in the beginning very much focused, and now still relatively much focused on cross-compliance, or as we call it now, conditionality. We want to get away from that. First of all, because we don't want that advisors are like a separate part. They need to learn from the research. They need to learn from all our now practice-oriented projects. In the last 7 years, Kerstin told it, more than 200, maybe already 2,500 operational groups with practical solutions, multi-actor projects that are really working for practice with a lot of enthusiasm, as we saw in one of our last meetings of the SCAR meeting group. So we need to capture all that knowledge and bring it to the advisors. And they will not come and get it, because every hour that they lose, they cannot turn into money by advising. So we will have to invent things to capture them in our trainings, in our events, in our operational groups, where they can learn from all this, in meetings with researchers, through this back office, using the knowledge database, etc., etc. So forget the FAS, which will not mean that the advisors themselves, who were part of the FAS, who were indicated as the bodies for the FAS, they are advisors as any advisor. And we welcome any advisor, whether he comes from the FAS or whether he doesn't come from the FAS. Yeah, was there somebody interfering or? Okay, I continue. Good. So we welcome all public and private advisors. So what is there left of certification? Not much. Article 13.3 says that advisors should be impartial, So you need to have a kind of contract with your advisor that he promises solemnly to be impartial. And maybe you could invent a sanction if there's evidence that it would not be the case, to scare them a little bit. But impartiality is definitely the only thing that until now we have as certification. I wouldn't even call it certification anymore, because certification gives this impression that it's much more. It would be like what we have now, a minimum of 3 years experience, a minimum capacity of the bodies, and all those kind of things, which are really counterproductive. We have a lot of emerging topics like digital, like short supply chains, like the social issues, where many advisors don't have this experience. And by getting, and that's what we want, by getting them to learn this through operational groups, they will start multiplying this. So it's no use to ask 3 years experience, because you will have almost all with no 3 years experience on this. This is all very recent, and it goes on because climate change and environmental issues, they're all developing a lot of modern farming techniques. There's a lot of effort to know everything that we manage under Horizon and under the operational groups is meant to serve the farmers and the practice and the foresters, not to forget. So we really want to use that, and this is in fact the quality of the advisors. This will mean that the advisors will become qualitative through their interlinkages in the AKIS. And you will see this popping up if everything stays as it is, because it was discussed in the trilogue. The Parliament proposed to go back to the old situation with all the limiting factors of certification. We discussed this and we said, listen, through the AKIS we can offer now a much better quality assurance. Well, assurance is maybe not a good word, but through all their linkages and the learning they can do, the training they can get, the involvement in all these activities, they will be much more qualitative. So if you have a good strategic approach, that's covered. You just have to ensure and make a contract with them that they are impartial. And then from our former seminar in September, in fact, the consensus was a little bit that the ideal way to present this to the farmers, to give them the full choice of whatever advisor they would like to choose, and to know what this advisor has to offer, would be like to put their CV and all the interesting things that they did. Have they been involved in operational groups? Are they more focused on digital, or are they more the classical technical nutrient pesticide people? So to put this on a website so that it's transparent for everybody. The people, of course, on that website would be only the impartial ones. We don't want the commercial bodies to come on that website. So this is part of the AKIS work in the country. And a second thing I may already disclose to you is that together with this definition, we also talked with the Parliament, who wanted a minimum amount of training. And in fact, we also wanted that. It didn't end up in the regulation, but we wanted that from the start, because we've seen that even for the relatively small amount of subjects that the old FAS was covering, already a regular training was needed. So I would think that we would even need more regular and obligatory training for those advisors who want to profit from the CAP. It's their own choice. If they don't want support from the CAP, okay, then it's their choice. But if they want to profit from money from the CAP, it is very, very important that they are regularly trained and qualitatively involved in all these kind of AKIS activities. I hope this is clear enough.
Inge, thank you for such a comprehensive response. There is an additional point of clarification also from Vanessa's. you mentioned advisors looking for financial support, training, etc. But in terms of the selection of advisors for support, you're insisting that they should be, the criteria is impartiality.
I'm not insisting, it is in Article 13.3, so
sorry,
and already
sorry.
approved. Already approved. I mean, through the trialogues, so you can count on this. This is definitely going to be only impartial, but public and private. No problem about that. But must be impartial, and you must ensure that they are impartial. And the most logic thing, we had some exchanges with some countries on that. The most easy thing is to just make them sign an agreement and say that the moment we discover that you're not impartial through witnesses, through evidence that we have found, we will scrap you and you will never get, well, I don't know, never, you could say for 3 years, or I don't know, I leave that to you to invent, but you're not eligible for cap payments anymore.
Okay. Thank you very, very much for that clarification. Thank also to our Greek colleagues for raising the issue and continuing to explore it. Yes, we also have now an additional comment as well. It's a long comment from Anna. Anna, would you actually like to take the microphone and to ask the question directly to Inge?
Yes, yes, I can. How can we envisage the interactive action using the types of intervention of the actual Article 7.2? If we understood well, we will have a type intervention for training, a type intervention for advice, a type of intervention, and no mixed of this intervention. Is it so?
Your question is it obligatory to have advice? So you are supposing that advice is not obligatory, training is not obligatory, these mixing of actors in certain types of on-farm demo or meetings. Is this your question?
No, I asked if the Italian region make a call for a mixed action of training, advice, all on the 7.2 article.
Yes.
One call for one action, for example, for one specific objective of a CAP, with mixed action of training, advice, information, demonstration. Some of our administration expert says that it's not possible because also the system of indicators doesn't allow this.
Yeah.
Because there is one type of results for one type of intervention.
Well,
I don't know if I...
No, I understand. I think I understand your question now. Thank you very much for explaining. I think it's not a system of indicators that doesn't allow it, because you can easily connect an intervention coming from Article 72, based on Article 72, to the CCO, the cross-cutting objective. So then obviously you're linked to AKIS and you have no obligation to split up in further specific objectives. You may add specific objectives. Suppose you have an advisory measure dedicated to certain climate actions, then of course you would add the specific indicator for climate. But overall, what I hear, and we talk a lot also in the AKIS group, you know, what I hear is that most countries, which is very logic, see advice as something holistic. It's one-to-one on the farm. You arrive there and you want to bring a certain message, but you will obviously get other questions and they will interact because it's a whole context. You have to take a decision for the farm and not only for the climate, so it will have to fit into the other things that are working on the farm. So definitely these things intermix and most of them, I expect, it's early days to say this, will devise an advisory measure which is very broad, under which they can do several calls, maybe, if they want to have dedicated things on environment or climate or on social issues, relation, short supply chains, you name. So, but the basic interventions they are planning is mostly very broad and linked to the CCO. And don't be afraid, you don't have to split it up in all these specific objectives. Like, in fact, what we had in the current, and I think that's the reason why there's so much confusion, in the current regulation, the cross-cutting objective on knowledge and innovation was a cross-cutting one, but you were obliged to link to priority 1 or, 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or, yeah. So you had to really make that link. But this is not the case anymore. The CCO has become an objective, even if it's cross-cutting and helping all the other objectives. It is an objective on itself to which you can attribute intervention. Now, second part of your question is also a very important one. And it's really nice to see in these 3 webinars to come to all the hot issues, and this was one we were still missing. Should we make mixed actions where we put training, advice? Of course, when the new delivery model was sold, let's say, to the member states, this was the way to make it attractive. But the practicalities that you need to set a unit amount make it difficult, because a unit amount for training will be very different from a unit amount for advice, from a unit amount for certain information actions, demonstration on farm, etc. So it will be probably administratively much more easy to work as you are working now in your rural development programs, to define a certain intervention with the linked unit amount, which is linked to the CCO, which will probably be linking almost sure to result indicator R1, and in many cases also R2, because advisors will be involved in one way or the other, so they are integrated in this way in the AKIS. But to have one big mixed action, you will be in quite some difficulties to find a unit amount for such an action. So in that sense, well, you might find a solution, but most countries think that it's not feasible. That's what I can say.
So but thank you very much.
It is allowed, just to be sure you can do it.
Okay, so, thank you.
Thank you very much to Anna for putting those really hot topics on the table. And as Inge says, this hadn't arisen in the previous webinars, but now it has, and that's fantastic. I see that Alex would also like to ask a question. Alex.
Hello from Athens. Hi, Inge.
Hi.
I think that the question is a little bit more complex. I'm thinking of this as an example. You have a training for young farmers, but you also want young farmers to participate in a number of relevant to their topics demonstrations, plus you want young farmers to have priority in advice. So I think that's the question. How do you combine? And if you can combine all this in the plan, I don't mean that you cannot do it in the practice, but how do you present it in the plan? That's the question. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for clarifying that. I would say training will be organized anyway. Most of the countries, almost all or all, I think even in this period, they organize training. So you could attract training for young advisors, first of all, by making it obligatory. Second, to make it much cheaper if they have to pay a personal part. If you're not 100% support rate, you could make it much cheaper. But of course, an obligation is much stronger. That's clear. So this could be a sub-part of defining the call for advice under Article 72. Then the fact that they must participate in demos, you could add to, as a condition, we have this with agri-environmental measures too, that they need to be sufficiently, how is it exactly said? I'm a bit doubting on the precise wording, but even in this period, we had some kind of obligation that they were sufficiently informed on these agri-environmental measures. So there was this mixture of training with advice. And there are now several dedicated measures for young farmers. So I would say there, if they must participate in demos, then I would say if they get this money, you just add, you must participate in X demos or certain specific demos that you want them to follow or whatever. You can be creative there. And then that they have a priority in advice, that would then be a part of your advisory measure where you give priority to young farmers.
So that makes a good whole. I mean, that's more holistic.
But I mean, this doesn't mean that you have to make a holistic measure, but you still pick up the 3 elements that you want to come to.
Fine, thank you very much.
Then thank you, Alex, for raising the question. And I mean, this is exactly the type of interaction that we were hoping for between you participants and Inge, especially. I see that there's a question come from Dimi relating in Bulgaria, relating specifically to the FAS. What I'm going to suggest, because time is working a little bit against us, let's hold that question until after lunch when we're talking specifically about advisors again.